This is Youth Explosion, training the youth for a Gideon force to be the light force to the world. Are you ready to join us? God said we are to be the light of the world, Matthew 5:14 and 15. To light a path in darkness. God said a small child shall lead them. Then let's go on and lead the world to Christ.
Hi, this week we're going to talk about Moses, baby of destiny. You know, you think about you as a youth and some of the trials that you've been through, and maybe you think, gee, nothing's ever going to happen and I'm never going to get anywhere. Well, in Jeremiah 29, verse 11, it says, "The plans I have for you are for a hope and a promise and a future." They really are. I know sometimes we think, well, gee, I wanted to go this way, and it didn't work out, so I had to go another way. But it says the steps of a good man are ordered of the Lord, and He really will order your steps. So I just thought we would just take some time here and talk about Moses. It's in the book of Exodus. Let me just read a little bit, and then let's go through the story of Moses. Number one, let's remember, Moses was a real man. He really did exist. And his story is a true story. It is not fiction. In chapter 2 of Exodus, it says, "There was a time, a Hebrew fellow and girl of the tribe of Levi who married and had a family, and a baby son was born to them. When the baby's mother saw that he was unusually a beautiful baby, she hid him at home for 3 months. She said, well, why did she hide him? Because Pharaoh had heard and understood that a deliverer was going to come. If we go and jump forward a couple of thousand years, when it was time for Jesus to come, again the king knew that there was going to be a deliverer born, and what happened? They sent out people to Bethlehem to kill all the children ages 2 and under. Isn't it interesting? The attack is always on the youth. I mean, we took prayer out of the schools and Bible reading out of the schools. It's always the youth that get attacked, because Satan knows that if he can attack you, then he can have the nation and the world. And that's his real goal. He's trying to do the same thing he's been trying to do since Genesis, and that's to make us all think we can be a God. And we cannot be a God. All we can do is be a deliverer, just like Moses and like Jesus, because Jesus lives in us. So she hid him. Then when she couldn't hide him any longer, because with small babies, they're kind of quiet, and you really, you can keep them so that nobody else would know they're around. So she made a little boat of papyrus reeds, and if you've seen the 10 Commandments, you know how it goes. And she put the tar on it and reeds, and she went along the river's edge, and she sent his sister along with him. And that would have been Miriam. Miriam was much older than Moses. And she watched as the little float, the little ark went along the river. Now, there's so much there I could talk about with an ark, the Ark of the Covenant, which Moses was going to be the one to bring in, and he was the one that was the lawgiver. There's just a lot there, but let's just kind of stick to the story. Maybe another time we can get into that. Well, what happened? The princess just happened. The princess was there, one of Pharaoh's daughters, and she was bathing. And they saw this little boat, and they went and picked it up, and they said, "Oh, isn't this baby cute? Must be one of the Hebrew children." They knew it was a Hebrew child. They knew that the command had gone out for all the Hebrew children ages 2 and under to be killed. And she said, this baby's sister approached, and she said, "Shall I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, do," the princess replied. So the little girl rushed home to the mother. There's a big trust story here, a lot of trust. I mean, this mother thought, well, they're going to kill him. I'm going to send him down the river. Perchance someone will see him and take care of him. I'll send the sister along. So the Pharaoh's daughter is bathing, and they see this little baby. And she comes up immediately and doesn't really give her a chance to think about what she wants to do, and says, well, would you like for me to get one of the Hebrew women to nurse her? It's like, well, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that. And she takes her back to the mom, takes Moses back. And of course they called him Moses because he was drawn out of the water. It's really an interesting thing here. I mean, how this trust of the mother to God, just trusting God to take care of this little one. Your moms and dads are at home and they've sent you to school and they are trusting. I don't know how to get across to you this trust. I know that when I went away to college, my mom and dad lived in Fort Lauderdale, and I went to Indiana University, which is in Bloomington, Indiana. And I remember my dad sat me down. He says, you know, we've taught you all we can, and we hope that you'll do the things and choose to do the things that we've taught you as we send you away to college. And then they left me in the Lord's hands, and the Lord took care of me that whole time that I was gone, and brought me back safely. And here, I mean, she puts this baby in a river, and she believes that God is going to take care of this baby of destiny. Sometimes, you know, you say, well, there's a lot of coincidences in my life like this. The Pharaoh's daughter just happened to be there at the right time when the boat just happened to be coming by. They're not coincidences. Today, the day that we're taping this, this morning, we had to go somewhere, and my husband and I went, and we came back, and he says, I really feel like I'm supposed to be at work at 10. I said, well, I really like to get gas. I don't really want to have to get the gas. You know, I was being kind of selfish. You know, I'd rather you get the gasoline. But he says, I really need to go to work. I said, okay. So took him off to work, and then I went up, I guess it's Spartan Boulevard, then to 183rd Street. And as I'm going up there, it's like, oh my. And I saw a police car go by, and I thought, man, that police car's going awfully fast down this road. And just about 2 seconds behind, here comes another one with a silent alarm. You know, when they have the little bubble gum machine going, but no alarm going. And I thought, oh, okay, now I know why my husband had to be at work at 10. That was so I could be here at this time to pray for this situation. So I prayed for protection and that whatever was going on would be resolved and that the Lord would take care of it. And you say, boy, that's kind of really far out. Well, I just live that way. You know, you don't have to, but that's just the way I live. I just live like, you know, the Lord's right there with me, and I can just talk to Him and ask Him to do things, and that He'll do those things. And someday we'll get into talking about prayer, but I'm saying this to talk about these God incidences instead of coincidences. Then I had to go to the grocery, but I did a couple other things first, and then went to the grocery, and I forgot I was going to take the film in, so I remembered, okay, I got to take the film. When I went to the counter to put the film in, 2 young men came up, and the woman behind said, how is somebody or other that's in the hospital? Oh, they're dying. They have pneumonia. They're really in bad shape. The lungs are bad. They're in a coma. I said, okay, Lord, now I know the next thing I'm supposed to do, and that is to pray for them. No, I didn't say anything to them. I just did it. I just said, God, you know the situation here. I pray for their salvation first. I pray that you would heal them, that their sins would be forgiven, and you'd raise them up off of the sick bed. And then I just went on. But these things are not they're not coincidences, you know, well, I just happened to happen to me, or it just happened that I was here. They're God incidences, because if you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, He will order your steps. He ordered the steps of Moses' mom. She knew exactly when to put that little boat into the Nile River, and knew to send his sister along so that this child would be taken care of, this baby of destiny. Now, as we go along here, we know that the child is raised by the mother until he's weaned. And we have to understand that they nursed their children up to around age 3. This was not a 6-month thing. So the little boy knew he was a Hebrew whenever he went back to the Pharaoh's daughter to be raised in the Pharaoh's court under, you know, going to their schools, all the finest schools, and raised in the things and the tradition of the Pharaohs of Egypt. But he knew who he was, and there came a time when he was like, I need to go and see my Hebrew brothers. And he went to see them, and what did he see? He saw one of them being abused and beaten by the Egyptian. He killed the Egyptian, and he hid him, and he thought, well, now nobody is going to know this. Nobody is going to have any idea that I've done this. The next day, he sees 2 Hebrews fighting. And he goes up and he says, why are you fighting like this? You're brothers. You shouldn't be fighting. He says, what are you going to do? Kill us like you did the Egyptian? And he's like, oh, no. And he ran. And he left Egypt. Now in the 10 Commandments, it tells it a little differently. But if you'll get your Bible out and you'll begin to read in Exodus 2, you'll find the story. I have no problem with Cecil B. DeMille's production of the 10 Commandments. I mean, that's the way that he saw it. And I just am trying to give it to you the way the Bible did. It's a good movie. In fact, after you have heard this, maybe, I don't know if you have VCRs in the dorms, or if maybe you go home on the weekend or something, you might want to rent the 10 Commandments and just take a good look at it, and it'll help you to really understand a little bit about what I'm trying to teach you about here. Now, he runs away a murderer, okay? And he goes into the desert or the wilderness or the backside of the desert. And he's like out here, and he finds some people and he begins to live with them and to live the life of a shepherd. It's very interesting. Chapter 3, it says, "Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even Horeb." He was a shepherd. Now, you think about it now. He has come from being Pharaoh's son with the possibility of being the Pharaoh of Egypt. I mean, wealth at his fingertips, servants, anything he wanted he could do. I mean, he had great authority, but he commits a murder. He was out of God's timing. He knew he was to be the deliverer, but he didn't wait for God to say the time. So he's just like seeing this thing, and he commits the murder. Now, all of us, that's the way sin hits. We're going along, we think we're doing what we're supposed to do, and along comes a situation, and all of a sudden, you find yourself in bed with somebody, and it's like, I know this is not where I belong. What am I going to do? We have to learn to say no to sin, because there is a consequence to sin. I want you to say, when I sin, come on, I know you always say, boy, this is crazy. Do it anyway. Just humor me. Say, when I sin, there is a consequence to sin. But when I sin, there is one who will forgive my sins and help me not to sin anymore. Remember the Lord's Prayer. It even says in the Lord's Prayer, it says, Lord, keep me from temptation. What? Temptation to sin, of course. So you don't have to sin. It doesn't have to be done, okay? So Moses is here, and he's come off of his, quote, high horse and down out into the desert, and he's taking care of sheep. Now, I don't know if you know very much about sheep, but they are really dirty, they are yucky, and they are stupid. It is no wonder the Lord always compares us to sheep. You know, if a sheep falls over on its side, that you have to go pick it up because of the way it's built, it cannot get up. And their noses have to be cleaned, and they have all kinds of vermin and things. You just have to keep them clean. And if a sheep keeps going astray all the time and you can't seem to get him to come back in the flock, they'll break that sheep's leg, put him around their neck, and carry him until it's mended. And after it's mended, then that sheep will walk along beside of him and won't stray anymore. And if a wolf comes in to take a part of the pack, then they'll kill the wolf. Remember whenever we talked last week about David and Goliath, and how David had slain the bear and the lion that came in to take the sheep away. So Moses was learning all about sheep, because you see, he was going to shepherd a very large flock, being the nation of Israel. And as he's on the backside of the desert, let's see what it says here. It says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush." Now y'all are saying, this is crazy. You know, an awful lot of people do not believe that the Bible is true. Yet it's the biggest selling book, and no one can disprove it. In fact, every time I have known people who they set themselves out to disprove the Bible have ended up believing on the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. So you can't disprove it. I mean, if you think, boy, this woman is off the wall, then you try and disprove me. Go ahead. The blunt of the proof is on your side. All right, a flame of fire came out of the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, but the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will not turn aside to this great sight. Why the bush is not burnt? He's looking at this thing. It's like, okay. He feels like the same as you do. This bush is not burning. All right, okay, I'll turn aside. And the Lord saw that he turned aside to see. Sometimes the Lord will put something in your way, and he's just going to say, are they going to turn aside to see what I'm doing? When there's revival, are you going to turn aside to see what the Lord is doing? Even with this program coming to you, just a Bible study, to tell you a little bit more about the Old and New Testament and some of the people that are in the Bible, and to help you to even understand yourself better, because, maybe you have been, in a high position, and all of a sudden you find yourself not where you used to be. But know this, that everything will be restored better than it was before. And he turned aside, and as God saw that he turned aside, he said, don't draw near to me. He said, take off your shoes, for you're going to be standing on holy ground. Here we are back to tell you more about Moses. Let's pick up where we left off. Exodus 3, where God said, don't come any closer. You're on holy ground. Take off your shoes. So he did that. And he told him, he said, I am the God, the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses covered his face because he realized that this truly was God. Then the Lord told him, I have seen the sorrows of the people. In other words, he began to hear the prayers of the people. God says, I've heard their prayers. I've heard their deep sorrows. And the time is now for their deliverance. He had told Abraham that the people of Israel would be in Egypt for a certain number of years. And when they left, it was on the exact day that was exactly the number of years that God had told Abraham, some 420 years prior to that. That prophecy was fulfilled. And God says, I've seen their sorrows, and I'm using you. Now you have to realize Moses was on the backside of the desert for 40 years. During that 40 years, he forgot most of his education. He didn't have any books to read. He became, he just didn't have that talking that you have with your intellectuals. And he became just a shepherd, and he really did not feel adequate. So when God told him, who he was, and he said, I'm going to send you, then what does Moses say? Same thing that many of us say sometimes when someone says, I'm going to do this, I want you to do that, and you say, oh no, not me, I can't do that. But I'm not the person for the job like that, Moses exclaimed. Then God told him, I will certainly be with you, and this is my proof that I am the one who is sending you. When you have led the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. He says, I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you proof that I really am sending you. And Moses, keeps saying, but I can't. I don't know how to talk anymore. I can't do this. And God says, hey, I'm God. And then Moses said, well, who am I going to say sent me? They're really going to listen to me. Why would they listen to what I'm saying? He said, tell them the I am sent me. Now the I am, that name for God had never been until this time. We need to understand God is the I am God. When? Right now. He's the I am of today. Whatever your need is this minute, right now, God is there to provide and meet that need. If you can just reach out and say, I dare to believe. That's basically it. I dare to believe, God, that you really will do this thing for me. And then, he continued to talk, and he says, well, I can't do these things. They won't believe me, and so on. So God says, well, here, I'm going to give you two signs, the rod and the leprosy. So he said, throw the rod down. He threw it down, and he was frightened because it became a snake. And God said, pick him up by the tail, and he did. It became a rod. And then he said, put your hand in, and he put it in his coat. He took it out, and it was leprous. He said, put it back in again, and he took it out, and it was not. He said, but they won't believe the first miracle. And if they don't accept the other two signs, he says, then take water from the Nile River, pour it on the dry land, and it'll turn to blood. And he gave many other things that would happen. And Moses still, in verse 13 of chapter 4, he says, Lord, please send someone else. And then the Lord became angry. I know that when the Lord called me to teach the Bible, I'm like, you ought to use my husband. He's ministered to a lot of people. He's talked to lots of people. It's real easy for him to talk. I get nervous. Lord, you should use him. And I came to the Lord 3 times with that. And it was like, I called you, I didn't call him. I have other things for him to do. And this is what I've called you to do. And I began to settle into it. But it was very difficult because I just really did. I got nervous. And when I spoke in churches, I would just get all shaky. And then when we went on the radio, I was a mess. I really was. And you say, well, boy, that's me. I get that way. And I have to get up and speak. And I want to be a teacher, but I just can't get up in front of those kids. Let me tell you, The God of the Bible is the God of the here and now, and He is the enabler. And if He can enable Moses to lead these people into the desert for 40 years, He can do the same for you and get you through whatever you're having to go through right now. So what God did was He said, okay, your brother is coming. I will use your brother as a spokesman, Aaron. Aaron will be the spokesman. You tell Aaron what to say. Now, I'll tell you, you tell Aaron. And that is precisely what happened as they went back to Egypt to begin to tell them, say, Pharaoh, let God's people go. You have to realize when he went back, the murder thing had all been done away with, and there was another Pharaoh on the throne. Now, we don't know, but it could very well have been someone who was would have been a stepbrother to him that was on the throne, that would have known him. But it had been 40 years since that person, had also been there, so they would have both been however old. It may have even been another generation. We don't know. But we do know that Moses went. And, I don't know. It just ministers to me to think Moses was a murderer. And God, after He had groomed him and gotten him ready, used him. You may be out there and you say, well, God can't use me because I have done this and I've done this and I've done that. God forgives. And if you're an adult out there and you're listening, maybe one of the teachers or professors, God forgives. He's a forgiving God. He's a merciful God. He does forgive, and He can still use you. If He could use Moses, a murderer, and we talked about David, and David, when we talk about him later on, he committed murder also. God still used him because he repented. Moses repented. Moses knew what he had done was wrong. So we know that there's 1 year span from the time he goes in till they leave, and the people of Israel, of course, are like, what'd you do? You come in here and things just get worse all the time. They're just worse and worse and worse. I mean, we really don't want to leave. We're just happy right here. I mean, they've been crying out to God, and all of a sudden, things get worse, and it's like they don't want to do it. The first thing that happened, what do you mean? You're going to take the people out in the wilderness? Well, I guess then if you're going to do that, you have a lot of time. Now you can make your bricks and stone and stuff without the mortar. You're not going to be provided with that. You'll have to do it. So they did not have the things that were needed. Whatever the material was, I don't know what you need to mix it, but you need straw and mortar and whatever to make the little bricks. But one of those ingredients they were not going to have provided for them anymore. They would have to go out and gather the straw. They would have to go out and get whatever it was to make that. And they're like, Moses, we were doing fine. When you came, it got worse. A lot of times when people get saved and they find Jesus, they say, this is for the birds. It's gotten worse since I got saved. Why? Because Satan wants you to think that this is not the way so that you will turn from it, not realizing that the end of this was deliverance. The end of the tests and the trials is always deliverance. No matter what you go through, the end is always deliverance. And we know that they went through many, many plagues, many things. There were flies. The river turned to blood. The flies, the lice. I mean, there were certain ones that Israel went through. But there was a time when God said, that's it, and the land of Goshen was separated. When it was night for Egypt, it was still daylight in Goshen. When they had hail, they didn't. There was a definite distinction made between them. And we go on and on up through Exodus 12, where they begin to get the instructions for the Passover because the angel of death was going to pass over. And God told Moses, if you'll put the blood on the doorposts, the angel of death will look and see those people belong to God, and they will pass over. That's why it's called Passover, because the angel of death passed over those homes. The institution of the Passover meal, the Seder, with the wine and the bread and the matzah, which we'll talk about in the spring, is the initiation of the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper is from that, and that is where it began at that time. And of course, we know what happened to Pharaoh. Everyone that was not under that blood covenant, the firstborn, died. the firstborn died. And Pharaoh said, enough is enough. I've had it. Moses, get out of here. Take your people, take your flocks, take your herds. Because at first he said, well, you can go, but you have to leave this. Well, you can go, but you can take this, but you have to leave this. And now he said, you can take everything. And not only that, when they left with almost all of the wealth of Egypt, because they had gone to their neighbors to borrow gold and silver. They went out with everything. I mean, they went out healed. There was not one sick among them. It says in Exodus, I am the Lord thy God that healeth thee. Not one sick, not one lame, when they left Egypt to go to the promised land. I want to stop here, and we'll finish this on the next time. And I want to let you know again, we're just so happy to be able to bring you Youth Explosion. And we hope that you're going to explode as youth with the love of the Lord Jesus Christ. And you'll begin to share with people about Jesus, and that he does save, and he does heal, and he does destroy all the works of the enemy. And don't forget, that phone number down there, you can call it. And we will be happy to talk to you and to pray with you and to share the Lord with you. We really do love you. God loves you. Let Jesus be Lord of your life. And why don't you sit down, find a Bible, go to the library or wherever, and read about Moses. We love you. Bye-bye for now. All of your offerings to Bread for Daily Living are tax deductible. If you would like our newsletter or catalog of materials, please write to the address on the screen or email. Thank you for watching Bread for Daily Living.